AltaSea. Everybody having a good time so far? That's how I know you can hear me. So the good news is there will not be a presidential debate today. Thank you all so much for coming. And let us start by giving a great big thank you to all of the AltaSea staff and especially our volunteers who are putting on the open house today. You can see our wonderful volunteers in the blue shirts, so if you have any questions about AltaSea, about how to be a volunteer, how to get one of these cool caps, how to become a member, how to support the organization, maybe be a volunteer yourself, please ask any one of the folks on the team. Really appreciate you being here. We'd like to start with a recognition of the land that we're standing on and the people that have gone before us and are still here. I'd like to welcome to the stage Cindy Alvitre to lead us in that ceremony.
Miahwen Meha Nona Twinan Cindy Alvitre. Good morning, everybody. I represent the director of Tiat Society, which is our Gabrielino Tongva maritime community. My ancestral village is actually right here, where we're at, right here. This is a village of Huihuibit, and my grandmother, Baha Maria, was from here. So this morning I want to acknowledge the ancestors of this land. I want to acknowledge the water, the air, our Mother Earth, all life that's here. And I want to acknowledge all of you also. Thank you for being here today to also participate in this as the future of our planet and where we go as human beings in supporting each other. As Native people, in honoring and acknowledging the land and the ancestors, it's really important that we acknowledge everybody and we acknowledge each other. That's the way we move forward. That's the Native way. That should be the human way. So bless all of you. And this is a place to do it at AltaSea. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. And later on, after the program, you'll have a chance to go visit the Gabrielino Tongva exhibit back here, cultural exhibit back in the corner, and constantly keep coming back and changing. I'm not going to say, but there's going to be some very big surprises coming very soon. So please go over and visit Cindy and her colleagues. And then, of course, also after the program, some of you may have already discovered that on the far end, on the south end of this warehouse, there are tables of many of our colleagues in the community and their organizations. A lot to learn, a lot to do, a lot to see. So please don't miss that. Enjoy getting to know those community groups as well. And as I mentioned, come become a member of AltaSea. What is AltaSea? For those of you that don't know, it's a nonprofit that is celebrating its 10th year. We're celebrating our 10th year. That deserves a round of applause, don't you think? Especially for people like Jenny Crusoe, our founding executive director, and our current vice president, yes, the COO. Give her a great big round of applause. And Robin Aubie, I know Robin is here somewhere, the people that have been here, Natasha, that have been here since the very beginning, that got the nonprofit started, that negotiated the 300-page lease with the port for us to take over this campus, and of course have started the process, and we've been raising money to renovate. Those of you that have been coming here, you know what a great renovation this is in these historic 110-year-old warehouses. We just got our temporary certificate of occupancy a couple weeks ago, and so now every time you come, it'll be different. Our tenants are starting to move in, and that's our researchers, our education programs, our workforce training, and importantly, our blue economy businesses will be moving in over the next few months and setting up their tanks of kelp, their 3D concrete printers, their carbon capture technology, all the exciting things from the blue economy we hope you'll all be part of. And again, just to let you know, when we say the blue economy, we're talking about regenerative aquaculture, both on land and at sea, that can help feed and fuel our future sustainably. We're talking about renewable energy, things like wave and tidal energy that can power our future sustainably. Also, things like carbon capture right out here on our wharf. We have 3 universities that are testing different methods of taking carbon pollution out of the water, and one of the byproducts of that, and one of the research projects is green hydrogen that can be used to decarbonize the port and improve air quality by electrifying all the equipment and trucks that operate in the port. So really double benefits from that exciting technology. And we also do a lot with blue tech, so underwater robotics and sensors and mapping. Many of you know Bob Ballard, the famed explorer who found the Titanic, as well as other amazing scientific discoveries about how our oceans and planet works, has a workshop here and builds all of his kit and sends it out to go find more Titanics and do other very exciting things. So anything to do with the blue economy, we have here the researchers who are spinning out the products and services, the companies that are then making those things and growing and using our space to demonstrate those things. And then importantly, K through 12 field trips, kids coming in here to learn about the ocean and learn about those blue technologies and hopefully become part of the workforce of the future. We're working with 13 community colleges to help design the training programs, the certificate programs, so that young people today will have those jobs of the future. So it's an exciting, vibrant place, and now that our renovation is well underway, we hope you'll come back over and over again. But today we have a really interesting program exploring the seaforestation solutions to our climate crisis. And we have two great speakers, and before I introduce Emily Aguirre, I want to just ask you to take a little quiz with me here. Raise your hand if you've ever worked with kelp or it's been an important part of your life. Yeah, okay, a few people. Sergey rose his hand twice. So not many of you can say you've really interacted with kelp. Now let me ask you another question. How many of you have brushed your teeth in the last year? And that better be every hand. If not, you might want to move away from that person. How many of you have eaten a cake in the last year? Okay. How many of you have ever grabbed a gallon of paint and had to paint something in your life? Okay, then the answer to the first question should also be all of you, because every one of those products most likely has kelp in it in the form of carrageenan, a thickener, which is an amazing product that comes from giant kelp that can grow right off California here and other parts of the world and is used in so many of those products. In fact, nature has figured out how to make this kind of a thickener for paint and cake mixes and for toothpaste and other products, and humans haven't been able to replicate that. It's still better done with algae and various forms of kelp. So we depend on that. Back in World War II, they were making gunpowder out of California kelp. It's an amazing, amazing creature on this planet that we depend on in so many ways that we don't even think about. 800 different species of plants and animals depend on the kelp forest, the healthy kelp forest right here, just a mile or two from where we're sitting. So with that, let me introduce somebody who actually knows a lot more about kelp than apparently any of us do, Dr. Emily Aguirre from the AltaSea Conservancy. She holds a PhD in biology, a Bachelor of Science in microbiology, and an AAS degree in chemical technology, interdisciplinary scientist who's interested in developing the tractable systems to study symbiotic associations between hosts and their microbes. And I hope she's going to explain to us what that actually means. Passionate about engineering the symbiotic interactions between bacteria and their hosts. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Emily Aguirre.
Thank you, Terry. Can you all hear me? I've never spoken out of a microphone, so this is the first time. Okay, so I'm excited to tell you about the kelp microbiome research that we're doing at AltaSea Conservancy, which is a kelp seed bank and nonprofit organization based here in AltaSea. So why kelp? Terry did a great job in telling you why kelp is important. But I also wanted to tell you a little bit more about why kelp is important. It is vital to biological ocean systems. It generates about $500 billion worldwide annually in ecosystem services, which means that It does things like capture carbon from the atmosphere and filter excess pollutants in the ocean, like excess runoff nitrogen and phosphorus. It also provides a habitat for diverse fish and other seafood species, like Terry mentioned. So you can see here. And I'm sorry, I thought the screen was going to be a little bit bigger, but yes. So you can see a lot of diversity happening. And it sustains local economies and fisheries as well, while maintaining biodiversity in the ocean. However, during the last half a century or so, about 40 to 60% of kelp forests worldwide are threatened. Why? Because of overfishing, marine pollution, and marine heat waves. In Northern California alone, over 95% of kelp canopy cover is gone since 2014, 2015. And along with it is all the genetic diversity in these kelp. So normally, kelp are very resilient creatures. They can take it, they can come back from it. But because so many events have been happening in such a short time, it doesn't give them time to adequately recover. And so when the next marine heat wave comes, that's what leads to the decimation of kelp forests worldwide. But again, like Terry mentioned, there is economic value in kelp as well, and it's not good if we have the decimation of these kelp because we rely on them for food. Food additives. There's a component called algin that we make out of kelp, and we use that in frozen foods as a cryoprotectant to prevent freezer burn. We use them in textiles, cosmetic products, skincare products, pharmaceuticals, medical grade devices. Recently, we've been using them as feedstock, but this is not a new phenomenon. We've actually been using kelp as feedstock for centuries, as evidence in Scotland, where they use kelp to feed North Ronaldsay sheep, which are some of the most expensive sheep in the planet and very rare to get a hold of. Recently, we've started using kelp as a biostimulant for terrestrial agricultural crops. And I know of at least 2 companies that use kelp as a raw material for bioplastics, and it's been eyed as a raw material for biofuel production as well. So at AltaSea's Conservancy, our mission is to ensure the health and biodiversity of macroalgae or kelp along the Pacific. And we do this by maintaining seeds. We maintain them for restoration purposes, for research, and for seaweed farming. I'm sorry, the image is so small, but as you can see here, kelp go through a complex reproductive life cycle, and if you look at the seed, they release spores out into the ocean when conditions are good, and those spores will either turn into a microscopic male or a microscopic female. And if conditions are further good, they'll get together and form and develop a mature kelp. So when I say seeds, I actually mean this part of the life stage. The males and the female microscopic stage. So here at AltaSea's Conservancy, we are interested in maintaining biodiverse seed stocks to maintain genetic diversity in kelp. We have a database of macroalgal genotypes and phenotypes, so that is the observable characteristics or traits in an organism. And we want to make sure that these seeds and the database are accessible to the public, that they're a public resource. We don't want this behind a paywall. So as of now, we are the largest macroalgal or kelp seed bank in the United States. We have over 2,500 seed stocks in collaboration with folks over at UW and USC. And we're also the only kelp seed bank that biobanks the microbes that live with kelp. So that is the kelp microbiome. So our pillars include seed banking, right? I told you about that. Aquaculture as well. We have dozens of tanks that can be used for growing biomass, kelp biomass. We're interested in restoration, so we want to preserve these seeds in case that some town up north needs to restore their kelp population. We want to have those available for them. And we're also interested in education and outreach, events such as this and other events like K-12 or even training partnerships and workforce development partnerships. Okay, so I guess I'll talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to microbes. So a lot of people think about them and they think about them as being pathogenic. And of course, they do have this function in kelp as well. But today I'm not going to talk about that. We can talk about that after this talk if you want to come find me. But today I want to look at the other side of the coin, and that is maybe some microbes are helpers of seaweed. And how can we exploit that to aid seaweed and to make sure that we keep these kelp forests going? We know that they cycle pollutants. So earlier I told you about how kelp absorb carbon and nitrogen and absorb carbon and filter out nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, they do this with the help of microbes. Some microbes that live on the surface of kelp also secrete these little tiny molecules that keep other bacterial pathogens away and also keep grazers away and prevent biofouling of the kelp. We know that some microbes induce spore induction, so that means that they trick kelp into releasing some of those spores, and they also help kelp go from the spore stage to the mature kelp stage. And we also know that they can act as growth aids for kelp, so they can help kelp grow. Recently, our collaborators and partners in the Nutrition Lab at USC published a study, which I will be telling you about later, where they found that the initial microbiome that a baby kelp had correlated with whether there was going to be higher or lower biomass. Kelp microbes can also be producers, so we can also use them in our human economies as well. We know that they have the capabilities of producing natural products, so that is phytohormones, enzymes that help kelp grow. They also have the capability of producing antifungals, antiparasites, antibiotics. Many microbes that are associated with kelp also produce B vitamins. A lot of these B vitamins cannot be produced by anybody else other than those microbes. And some of those vitamins are a necessity for us, and they're a necessity for kelp. So that is a functional role for kelp for microbes in kelp. And we also know that some microbes can degrade hardy sugars like alginate. Alginate makes up probably about 30 to 60% of the biomass in kelp. And it is a sugar that has been eyed as a raw material for biofuel production. The problem with this is that it's really hard to go from the hardy alginate to the biofuel, because in between, you need to break down that alginate into usable sugars. And the methods that we have right now are very costly and utilize toxic chemicals. But kelp microbes can actually degrade alginate very easily and effortlessly. It's what they do. So an effort to isolate these microbes has been done in the past, but there's not many experimentation that has happened, and that's something that we are very interested in looking at. So previously, I used a data set that was generated by the Nutrition Lab over at USC, where they took seeds from the 4 different sites along the Southern California coast, as you can see here. And they went ahead and took the seeds and sequenced their DNA. Then after they did that, they outplanted the seeds off the coast of Santa Barbara and let them grow for 4 months. They came back after 4 months to assess how much they grew, and they found that the initial microbiome that some of these seeds had correlated with either higher biomass, so higher growth, or lower growth of the kelp. So I wanted to find out why this was, and I went ahead and took this data set, and I had to separate the bacteria DNA from the kelp DNA, and I did this through computational tools, which I won't go over. There's just too long, but here's the pipeline of what I did. And again, I'm sorry that the screen is so small, but this is a condensed version of my results. And as you can see on the left here, these are all the bacteria that I found, but of interest to me was what's on the right, which tells us what the metabolic potential is of this bacteria. So the DNA told us what these bacteria can potentially do when they're engaging with kelp. And in the blue, you see that almost all those bacteria engaged in amino acid usage, which usually ends up turning into bacteria poop that is ammonia. And kelp love ammonia. So that is a potential role of these bacteria with kelp. They're giving kelp ammonia. But when we looked through the sequences, we also found that these bacteria had the capability of producing antifungals, ectoine, which is a cryoprotectant and osmoprotectant, antibiotics, this compound resorcinol, which is found in a lot of acne medications. They have the ability to concentrate heavy metals in their cells. And of interest to me, they also have the ability to degrade that hardy sugar I told you about earlier, alginate. So based on this data, and I'm sorry, the picture is not here, but the person is here. Based on this data, we decided to partner up with Professor Dr. Erin McCauley over at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and she's here, and you can see her over there in person. Her picture doesn't appear. And we have 2 interns working with us, Tristan Partida and Alexis Calderon, and what we're doing is we're trying to isolate these alginate degraders. And again, sorry you can't see the pictures here, but the process is quite simple. We're going to take microbes from healthy kelp and from seeds that we have in our seed stock and isolate them using different plates with different sugars that emulate what you would find on the surface of kelp. And then after we get those pure isolates, we're going to take them and assess their chemical and metabolic profiles. And that'll tell us whether they can truly degrade alginate or provide kelp with other fun compounds to aid them in growth and health. So although we just started June 2nd with our interns, we already have a couple highlights. We're able to enhance the protocol for mucus production of Macrocystis perifera. This is helpful because it will allow us to get more mucus out of it, and we can actually assess the chemical profile of this mucus to help us understand how we can make better media to isolate those alginate degraders. And I'm happy to report that we actually do have some potential isolates already in some of the plates. So that is a big win for us. So what's next? We're going to keep isolating this whole summer. We're going to try to isolate until we can't no longer isolate. We want to get these bacteria. We want to sequence them and do those chemical and metabolic profiles on them. After we get those bacteria, we want to actually put them to the test. Something in the plate tells you one thing, but that's not necessarily what's happening out in the real world. So we actually want to take these bacteria and see if they can degrade alginate in kelp in real life. We want to go on a side quest, and if we find other bacteria that might be of interest, we want to see if they can help kelp grow and if they can help kelp withstand high temperature. And more. Right after this talk, my interns and I are going to go over to berth 57, and we're going to start an experiment where we're going to see if some of the bacteria that we have can trick kelp into releasing spores. And we're also interested in developing better methods for cryopreservation of kelp. The methods that are currently in place only give us a very low percentage viability, and that is not good if you are a seed bank. So if you walk away with anything regarding my talk, I want you to know that kelp are vital to local ecosystems, but they can only perform as well as their relationships with bacteria. We don't know what the function of these bacteria is. It has not been fully characterized. We have ideas, but we don't really know. And at AltaSea's Conservancy, we're trying to find out, and at this point in time, we're actually identifying microbes with this probiotic and alginate degradation potential. So with that, I want to present you to the ASC team. There's Sergey, our CEO, Nina, our CFO, Michael, our collections curator, the whole board, our team of sponsors. And with that, I'll end it. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Fantastic. My brain feels bigger already. Before I introduce our next guest, I want to also introduce and thank the AltaSea Board of Trustees, and I think today our trustees are represented by our chair. Where is Dr. Geraldine Natz? There she is, right there. Stand up, give a wave. I want to make sure you know everybody who is part of AltaSea that may not be in a t-shirt today, so that if you have questions, you can ask. And I don't know if any of our other trustees made it today. If so, raise your hand. If you're not here, raise your hand. Okay, anyway. Thank you all so much. I also want to thank our amazing donors and supporters. We would not be here without you. We are, of course, a nonprofit. The Port of Los Angeles has been a major donor to help us renovate this space. State of California has been, and we have the California Department of Fish and Wildlife here as one of our tenants. We couldn't do this without them. We thank them, but also our very generous individual donors, foundations, and so forth. And as you go back out through the main door out there, past the office and restrooms and things, you'll see big banners with all of the sponsors. Please take a note and say thank you to them if you happen to see them. Let's give them a big round of applause. And the last announcement I want to make before we get on to our next exciting speaker is mark your calendars for September 28th. We will be hosting our annual Blue Hour event, which will be very exciting this year, usually focused around art. This year it'll be around music and art. It'll be held in berth 60, which is the southernmost one at what we call Land's End. It has this panoramic view of the ocean and the Angel's Gate entrance where all the ships come in. It'll be a very exciting event. Tickets are going to go on sale very soon. And sponsorship opportunities if you have a company or an organization that wants to sponsor. But very importantly, it's a fun evening. It is a fundraiser, but it's none of that white tablecloth, sit down, boring rubber chicken speeches and the rest of it. Trust me, it's a lot of fun. September 28th, starting at 5:30 in the afternoon. Let me now introduce the founder of Seatopia, James Arthur Smith, who is a fascinating guy. He started his journey in regenerative aquaculture as a teenager, gaining experience by breeding steelhead trout. And he's my hero because he did what I still hope someday I'll do. He sailed the Pacific for a decade, visiting aquaculture farms and connecting them to California restaurants. And then finally in 2020, what good timing. What else happened in 2020? Oh yeah, that COVID thing. In any event, in 2020, he founded Seatopia, which he's now going to tell you all about. Please welcome James Arthur Smith to the stage.
Thank you, Terry. And in case you guys don't know, Terry also has been thinking a lot and acting on restoring the Santa Monica Bay and San Pedro in his time founding the Santa Monica Bay Keepers. And part of their mission was really restoration of these waters. And this is such a beautiful version of this iteration as we continue to pool resources and create mechanisms to rehabilitate our waters. So yeah, my name is James Arthur Smith, and as Terry indicated, I spent a lot of time on the ocean. Spent almost 10 years living on a sailboat. I've had the good fortune of being able to sail from here all the way to the Galapagos Islands on a small sailboat, seen a lot of amazing things. I've had the opportunity to hug and kiss a gray whale and spend time with humpback whales and whale sharks and toothy sharks and all kinds of amazing experiences. Spent a lot of time in our local waters diving in the kelp forest, and I was in the kelp forest taking photos of my friends and of the beautiful light that comes through the kelp forest on a clear sunny day when we had our last big El Nino warming spell. It was amazing. We were out in the kelp forests with just our swimsuits on, swimming in this, 70-something degree water, crystal clear sunny days, having just the time of our lives. Just some of the most beautiful experiences that I've had in California. And the photos that we have from this day are so unique because you see people without wetsuits just diving in this beautiful environment, the way the colors of light illuminate kelp. It's so beautiful. But what we didn't totally grasp at the time was that incredible warming experience that we were having was also a tipping point in the health of our kelp forests. The water was so warm that a lot of the kelp has not recovered. So our kelp forest went from being very, very dense and incredible breeding grounds and spawning grounds and nurseries for myriad species, from our white sea bass and our local yellowtail. There's so many species that really depend on these kelp forests. These kelp forests are the lungs of our oceans, the lungs of the planet, the nurseries for all these organisms, but when they're not healthy, our oceans aren't healthy. And when the oceans aren't healthy, we have, we're part of that. We are part of nature. We came from the oceans. We are not, this is a beautiful photo and a beautiful statement. Our future is blue, but our past is also blue. Our genetics, we all come from, we have prefrontal cortexes because of marine algae. DHA is directly linked to our evolutionary path, history, and our future. So when I'm taking a breath right now, every other breath is oxygen from microalgae and some from the macroalgae as well. As much as 50% of the oxygen on this planet comes from algae. So when we call this planet Earth, we are still carrying on this tradition of short-sightedness, thinking that we're on a flat planet and Earth is what we see. But when we went to space, we saw that this was a blue planet, and it was blue, uniquely blue. It should be called ocean. It should not be called Earth. Earth is a misnomer from a time when we didn't have the perspective that we have today. So we have this opportunity to be alive because of the oceans, and in great part because of kelp. So Seatopia is a project that I've been working on for a few years to help support the oceans because they mean a lot to me, not just because I like to breathe oxygen, but because I've created my whole life connected to the ocean. I feel personally most alive when I'm in the church of the ocean, when I'm connected to the ocean, when I have that blue mind experience. If you guys haven't read Blue Mind, it's a fantastic book. Rest in peace. The author of that book just recently passed away, but it inspired me and many other people in this room, I know. I like kelp for a lot of reasons. We've talked about a lot of those. But if you gave me the choice to eat a plate of kelp or a plate of sushi that was, sushi grade salmon, for example, or steelhead trout, most of us would probably choose kelp, would choose the seafood, because kelp is just a little harder to digest for some people. It's not as attractive. When I eat fish, I actually feel alive. I feel vital. I feel like there's a direct exchange of energy. It's bioavailable. For me, it works well. For some people, it's different. But the levels of EPA and DHA from fish and from the Mediterranean diet, it's demonstrated in many, many studies to have an association to heart health and mental health in so many ways. All these blue zones had seafood as an integral part of it. So Seatopia is an interesting business that we've created, thanks in part to AltaSea, that is creating the catalyst to produce seafood in a more responsible way with the ocean. How do we catalyze the ecosystem services of kelp and shellfish in symbiotic relation to the fish that we like to eat as well? In nerdy terms, we call it integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. Integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, or IMTA, is really just a fancy way of saying it's multiple species growing symbiotically together. On land, we've created massive monocultures of corn, of cattle. We do these factory farms, monocultures, because we know how to control nature. But the outcomes of that are all these externalities like pollution and inhumane practices and food that is not really healthy for human consumption. But when we look at other models of regenerative farming, of polyculture farming, where we actually try to learn from what nature has taught us, that there are relations between the grasses and the microbes, as Emily was talking about, and the ruminant animals that roam across those plains. In the ocean, we're learning this as well. Just like Emily was talking about, the microbes have a very important relation to the microbiome of the kelp. And the kelp has a very important relation to shellfish and to fish. In farms, there's a stigma against farmed fish that a lot of people are familiar with, that fish poop is bad for the environment. Well, fish poop is actually a superfood. It's a nutrient. It just depends on what are those components that you're feeding that fish. If you're feeding that fish GMO corn and antibiotics and hormones, I agree with you 100%. But how do we cultivate fish with clean feed so that we can actually have a beautiful fertilizer? Because one of the things that we talked about with kelp is it wants phosphorus and nitrogen and ammonia, and those components are actually found in fish poop. So integrated multi-trophic aquaculture is this thing where we're actually creating symbiotic relationships between fish and shellfish and kelp and microbes and deposit feeders, and learning how to cultivate and farm in a different way. Not a monoculture, not thinking that we know how to control nature, but learning from nature, from the billions of years of evolution and how these organisms have evolved, with EPA and DHA at the base of this system, fueling the whole system. So today we're working with some farms that are feeding fish EPA and DHA from microalgae. Not feeding fish with other fish, not feeding fish with corn and soy and antibiotics, but raising microalgae, because they're the source of the EPA and DHA in fish. When you think about a fish and its health benefits, it's the EPA and DHA, and fish don't have a biological mechanism producing the quantities of EPA and DHA that we associate them with. It comes through bioaccumulating through the food chain. So you can actually grow these microalgae and feed them to the fish. And then you grow some proteins like soldier fly larvae, and you pair this together to produce a healthy feed input. And then as long as you have a symbiotic partnership, you understand what the feed conversion ratio is of the fish. Fish are going to eat a certain amount and they're going to poop a certain amount. Well, then you pair those with other organisms like your kelp that are going to absorb the dissolved particulates, and you have your shellfish like your mussels and your oysters and your scallops, and then your bottom feeders, and all of a sudden you're creating an ecosystem. And that's what we're trying to do with Seatopia today, is support this innovation in how we work with the ocean. Not to build industrial scale factory farms, but to develop a relationship that can be regenerative. How do we have a net positive impact on our relationship to the ocean? Not only at the farm, but a whole impact. There's also been some challenges with farming in the ocean because near coastal environments, we don't necessarily have the space or the right or the privilege. But there's over 70% of the ocean is what we call oleotrophic, low nutrient, offshore deep environment surfaces, where there's not actually enough nutrients to grow kelp or shellfish. But we could potentially introduce nutrients to those environments. And that's a really beautiful vision for the future of our relationship, is offshore farming in multi-trophic environments. Because kelp, shellfish, and finfish symbiotically in offshore environments could create abundance to feed this planet. It would take less than 5% of the coastline to feed the entire world's population of proteins, if done right, also have a net positive impact. These sort of farms that we're working with today that have a net positive impact on the environment are creating increasing biodiversity in that ecosystem by creating habitat, by creating places for spawning organisms to come and hide, and sequestering carbon. Because every time a shell from a shellfish like oyster or a scallop is being created, it's actually pulling carbon out of the ocean. It's helping offset ocean acidification. If we can scale these sort of systems and scale the ecosystem services that they provided, Emily talked about $500 billion of ecosystem services. How do we place a value on that and scale those systems? Because the ocean is, as some people know, the largest carbon sink, but we need to also offset that carbon. Offsetting ocean acidification and scaling these systems is very important. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm going to point over here and see what happens. I didn't prepare a deck. This is something else they gave me. My wife's at home 9 months pregnant, due any minute, so here's a slide. That's our boat when we were sailing around. That's me visiting a farm. I spent many years at this farm in the Sea of Cortez, swimming in. This is a photo from a place in the Sea of Cortez that's a marine protected area that I've swam at many times, but had the exact same vibes and experience inside of a fish farm. Because inside of a farm where the fish are in a deep water, low density environment, it's the same experience. Crystal clear water, thousands of fish swimming around, tons of space, usually a ratio of 2% fish, 98% water. Imagine around that, kelp and shellfish. It's a beautiful environment. Very different than a factory farm. The mission of Seatopia is to create a regenerative seafood supply chain, innovative aquaculture products, contributing to ocean reforestation. We also plant kelp with every single order because kelp farming and the reforesting of our oceans is not inexpensive, and we don't want these projects to just always be dependent on grants and handouts. Seatopia is a market-based solution to actually help plant more kelp. We planted over 7,500 kelp this season alone. That's a kelp forest. Kelp forests are pretty cool. They draw down 50 times more carbon than regular forests and produce oxygen. Let's do more of that. I've talked to some people on podcasts. We have a chef here that made some beautiful food today that's from farms that are doing things right. If I leave you with one thing today, it's that aquaculture is really cool and interesting, and farming fish is still an evolving relationship that we're learning about. You know, aquaculture in general, let's talk about salmon for a second, only started in the 70s. It's evolving significantly. It went from feeding salmon with bait fish to feeding salmon with corn and soy to where we are today, feeding them with algae and soldier fly larvae. This is sort of 3.0, and it's really cool. So not all farms are this way. There's huge market for commodity farms. Most farms are still going to produce commodity product because most people aren't asking, hey, what did that fish eat? But if you start asking those questions, how was it farmed and what did it eat, and maybe what did it eat, you will be driving demand towards better farming practices. Just like we saw with cattle and chicken, where 10 years ago, people just wanted USDA prime, but today we're asking for grass-fed, grass-finished, pasture-raised, regenerative practices. We can do the same thing with aquaculture. We can develop regenerative, scalable food systems, but it requires us not to be complacent. It requires us to ask those questions about where our food came from and have a connection to that. So, yeah, I'd invite you guys to go and visit our little booth over there. We have a chef serving some sushi-grade fish and kelp and maybe some scallops. It's all part of this system of asking where your food came from and what it ate, and having a meaningful relationship to the ocean and to your food. That's all I've got. But Emily, I think you should come up here and we should do, I think, a Q&A.
So this question is for you, Emily. When you talked about the spore phase, and then you go to the second phase where you have the male and female, and I can't remember what the name of that is, I'm just wondering why it isn't easier to try and kind of preserve the spores as versus that next stage.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Well, let me start off by saying it's gametophyte.
Okay.
But we call it seeds.
Okay.
It just makes it easier on everybody. Yeah, so they're called male and female gametophytes. Usually the stage before that is really, it only lasts for a little bit of time, and it's really, really hard to preserve. And like I said, if we could find a way to cryopreserve it, that'd be great. We could probably get away with it. But at this moment in time, they've tried in the literature, and the viability is very low. So, for example, if somebody sends us 200 kelp samples, and they want, we want to get the seeds out of those kelp, if we were to try to cryopreserve that stage before the gametophyte stage, we run the risk of not getting anything. Because when we try to bring them back from the dead, basically from being frozen, it's a gamble. It can be either 10% viability or a 60% viability. So we don't want to mess with that, so we rather just take them where we know that we can, and preserve them that way until we find better method. We figure out better ways to do that. And we want to work on that at AltaSea's Conservancy. We want to focus our research efforts on that, but that's going to take a lot of work. But we want to do it.
All right. I'm usually really loud anyway, but I guess I'll use this. Oh, here. So we have some questions online. So this is kind of a two-parter. How they sample their water and how you test your water for Emily.
How do we sample our water and how do we test it?
Yeah.
I don't believe we sample water or test it. We do have we get the kelp samples, but
Right.
We rarely ever get water samples along with them. We usually, when people send us, when researchers send us the kelp samples so that we can get spores out of them, they usually send them to us in a napkin in plastic with no water. So we don't ever get to sample the water, unfortunately. But that would be great if whoever is collecting these samples can actually test the nutrient quality of the water. That would be great. But again, that also requires a lot of money and supplies. So most people just don't.
Okay, thank you. And the second one is for James. I'm lucky enough to be his neighbor over there in Berth 57, as well as Emily's. So he's educated me a lot about sustainable seafood and farm seafood. I think like a lot of people didn't realize there's really good farm seafood. Can you explain what you explained to me about the amino acids in the salmon I sampled a while ago that blew my mind?
I don't remember the conversation.
I had never had farmed salmon before, and you explained why it was actually king salmon, why this was really good.
Well, quality in fish is a really amazingly complicated thing because the long chain amino acids of fish, which we all crave, they're very fragile. They oxidize very quickly. And that's why most people who say they don't like fish because it's fishy, they just haven't had good fish. It's very difficult to preserve and not let those fish oxidize. One of the things that causes oxidation is stress and lactic acid. And if a fish is harvested or caught in a way that's stressful, it's going to have high levels of lactic acid and it's going to be more likely to oxidize and it's going to taste fishy. So the way fish are harvested is possibly what we were talking about. There's so many different ways to kill fish that are inhumane and terrible and result in fishy fish. Most people are familiar with that. But we work with some farms, for example, that are focused so much on preserving the health and life and value and energy of that animal that they go to the extent of harvesting the fish in as low stressful way as possible to minimize lactic acid. And not just because they want to be nice, humane people, because it has a material and noticeable effect on the quality and the taste of the product. Some of these technologies and techniques were developed in Japan where there's such awesome nerds about these things. For example, there's a farm we work with that goes to the pens and has basically a giant vacuum that the fish swim up and into the live well tank of a boat. And that live well tank is pumped at a super high oxygen level. And that the highly oxygenated water causes the fish to just completely relax. They're at this relaxed state. And then they swim into a little canal. And one at a time, in this relaxed state, they get this ikejime process. It's a process that just immediately spikes the brain, spikes the nerve, or destroys the nerve, and then they get taken down the line and they bleed them out very quickly to remove the blood and lactic acid out of the fish as quickly as possible, optimizing for preserving the fragile amino acids of the fish and the long chain fatty acids of fish. So that could be what we were talking about. So if you just throw a fish onto the deck and let it suffocate, it's going to taste fishy real quick. If you fought that fish on a hook and line for a long time, it's going to taste fishy likely very quickly. So the way we harvest fish, optimizing for humane practices, also has a material effect on quality. Maybe that's what we're talking about.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I, as a consumer, am wondering, how do we get to participate in eating such quality fish? Because over the years, I've gotten further away from eating fish because of it being farmed or fear of where it's being harvested.
I was in that boat as well. There was a period of time I stopped eating fish because I didn't want to condone practices that I had seen firsthand were destructive. I've witnessed things in the ocean that I can't condone. Fortunately, enough of our community has said, hey, we want access to those same fish that for years we used to harvest these fish and sell them to the best Michelin star restaurants in the United States. And since COVID, we switched to selling direct to consumers. I'll be honest, this is not inexpensive fish. There's more intention and higher costs that go into producing these fish. But I can also tell you we lab test all of them, and we have quantifiable data on the levels of mercury and microplastics and omega-3s in them. So you have a predictable experience, and people can buy Seatopia delivered to their door. And you can also use an HSA account to pay for it. Seatopia is a qualified HSA expense, so in California we save like 30% there if you use your HSA to purchase it. So Seatopia.fish.
Yes, this is for Emily. What are your sources of funding for the work that you do?
Yes, good question. At the moment, we are funded by the Grantham Foundation. They give us a generous donation, but we are a nonprofit organization, so that, we've had little pools of money come in here and there, and we also actively are applying to grants with various entities so that we can keep going.
Hi there. Thank you both for your presentations. This is for James. I just wanted to ask if you could talk about the difference between offshore farms that have these various techniques and doing polyspecies farms and things like tidal areas like lagoons and or onshore. And if you've seen examples of that and success and different things like that.
Absolutely. There's no one model that is the only model. There's very place-based solutions. There's a wonderful TED Talk that Dan Barber did called I Fell in Love with a Fish, or How I Fell in Love with a Fish. It's worth looking up, about a farm called Vete La Palma in Spain, where they took a degraded estuary. Estuaries are such important parts of our ecosystem. A lot of fish come up into the estuaries to breed and spawn, and the estuaries play an important role in converting nutrients. Vete La Palma also became, after being this degraded, drained estuary, became a huge cattle farm. Unfortunately, some people came and took over that farm and removed the cattle and re-flooded the waters and created this estuary again that became a haven for flamingos and many, many species of birds, and phytoplankton and zooplankton attracted so many more species. And they approached managing this from the perspective of, how do we grow microalgae? How do we grow phytoplankton and zooplankton, and everything else will grow from there? Vete La Palma today is no longer commercially active, but the story continues with a project called Esteros Lobino that we're working with today, and is an amazing example of working in intercoastal tidal zones to grow zooplankton and phytoplankton as the base food source for the fish and the shrimp. And this is what is often referred to as extensive farming. So we also work with some shrimp farmers, for example, that don't have to feed the shrimp. Similar to Veta La Palma, it's not about putting feed into the waters to feed the fish. It's about creating an environment where the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, feed the organisms. So these shrimp farmers that we're working with have been contracted to reforest these mangroves, these intercoastal mangroves. And by protecting the mangroves, they also are able to release a native species of shrimp into these tidal lagoons, and at high tides they allow the water to congregate in a certain pool where they'll harvest these shrimp that they didn't feed at all. They're literally just extensively foraging the zooplankton and phytoplankton in there, and as a result you have this beautiful, beautiful products, whether that's the shrimp or the striped bass or the lobinos. There's extensive farms around the world that should be celebrated. This is a wonderful example of an alternative to industrial scale factory farming. And then there's another type of farming it's worth mentioning. That's referred to as RAS, or recirculating aquaculture systems, land-based farms. In the United States, we have a lot of land-based farms, RAS projects, because that's oftentimes all we've been able to get permitted. Similar to like hothouse tomatoes, growing things indoors, you're able to control the environment, control the outcomes, but hothouse tomatoes don't always taste as good as tomatoes grown in the ground, but they're still cool because you can grow them in the city on the rooftop, and they're scalable food systems. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Let's give James and Emily a great big round of applause. Thank you very much. I know there were many more questions, but James, as long as his wife hasn't given birth yet, is still going to be here. Go enjoy some of the food at Seatopia on the other side there. Emily, I think, will also remain and answer any questions. One last thing before we break and let you get to enjoy some of that food and some of our other exhibitors here today and so forth is I want to give an extra special shout out to our volunteers, and particularly a couple in particular, and our organizer of our volunteer program, Dorothy Cardenas. Our volunteers support our community outreach efforts with STEM education, with ocean research and conservation, and with the workforce development. And engagement is really the key to our mission and our vision at AltaSea to help demystify the blue economy, as we've done today a little bit for you, and by inspiring students and engaging the community on all levels. So to make a very special presentation about our volunteers, please welcome to the stage Dorothy Cardenas.
Thank you all. I know some of our volunteers couldn't make it today, but we are celebrating some of our volunteers that had been with us from the very beginning, that were with us through 2023, through all of our construction, and we're gonna go ahead and celebrate them today. And I'm so thankful for them. So we'll bring, if we could have Richard Ellingson to the stage. Thank you, Richard. If we could have Joy Lorando to the stage. If we could have Alexis come on to the stage. Okay, and then last but not least, if we could have Zoe Berenston to the stage. Sophie has been here longer than I've been here, so we're really excited to be celebrating her. Thank you, everyone, and thanks our volunteers who are here. Thank you, everyone, for coming. You can go ahead and make your way to the other side to talk to our exhibiting partners and to get some sushi. Thank you.